with a simple show of hands in response to this question. Are you confused about what to eat? Have you ever been in a supermarket where there are half a dozen brands of God knows what, and you've picked up the box and you've gone, well, what the fuck am I meant to do? What is the difference between these damn things, and what is this? Has anyone been confused about what to eat in their lives? Okay, good. Another quick test of you. How many calories do you consume daily? I mean, again, I'm just going to run through 5 answers, and you can just raise your hand when the appropriate one comes along. Under 1,200 calories. Anyone? No? 1,200 to 1,599. Okay. 1,600 to 2,000. And more than 2,000. Interesting. So, a final question, and I promise that this is going somewhere. Though this is the worst question ever, and in part that's because this isn't my question, this is someone else's survey, and I'm regurgitating this question for your benefit. Who is most responsible for making sure processed food is part of a healthy diet? Is it A, government regulators, B, food manufacturers? Anyone? You're waiting for all the answers. You want to know what the options are. You're that kind of crowd. See, food retailers, supermarkets, individuals, and school meal programs. So who's for A? Government regulators most responsible. B, food manufacturers. C, food retailers. D, individuals most responsible for making sure that food is, and school meal programs. Just thanks, no. So the reason I wanted to throw this up is because what I want to do is just show you a short clip from a James Beard talk, James Beard Foundation talk that happened a couple of years back, when a woman called Miriam Arend, who is the Director of Research for the Good Housekeeping Institute, Miriam was talking about how readers of Good Housekeeping magazine responded to the questions that you've just answered. And I think it's revealing. So rather than just sort of preempt this, let me show you Miriam Arend answering some questions. I apologize for the volume on this. I want to see if I can turn it down, because otherwise it can be very annoying.
And they're not keeping track of calories. 83% said they do not keep track of calories.
It's about 5 minutes.
When asked, though, how many calories they think they consume on a typical day, only 2% said they consume more than 2,000 calories. So, exactly, our reaction. One has to wonder, given all the snacking they're doing, if they have any notion at all of how many calories they're consuming. And as Samantha Cassie, our nutrition director, said when I showed her these results, she goes, well, if people were really consuming the number of calories they thought, we wouldn't have an obesity problem in this country. There is an intention and desire, though, among women to be smart about what they eat. They just want it made easy for them. 93% of Good Housekeeping readers surveyed said that nutrition plays an important role when selecting foods to eat at home, and nearly 3/4 said the same when ordering at a restaurant. More than 90% said they always, often, or sometimes order from a healthy menu when it's available. So when healthy food is available, they go for it. I think it's important for the chefs in this room to know that when women feel that restaurant menus are that they feel that they're highly influential on how they eat, more than fast food menus, packaged food manufacturers, and government regulators. I also think it's impressive that they're willing to take responsibility for that, how they eat. The majority don't blame their indulgences on the widespread availability of food or on how supermarkets display sweets to be tempting. They don't say that government regulators or food manufacturers are most responsible for ensuring that the food they eat is healthy. They do put the onus on themselves. It may be, I was trying to think about the reason for this, and I was thinking, well, maybe it's that they've seen attempts by government to influence what we eat. You know, Mayor Bloomberg's attempted ban of oversized sodas, and maybe they're just saying, I'm ready to take responsibility for what I eat. I want to be in charge.
Now, I find that sort of depressing. And the reason I find it depressing is because, on the one hand, there's a whole room full of people laughing at how poorly the readers of Good Housekeeping magazine are able to count calories. In general, average calories for this particular, for y'all is around, the average calorie intake is around 2,000, and for women and a little bit more for men. But in general, you could see that most people who read Good Housekeeping magazine couldn't possibly imagine that they were consuming more than 2,000 calories a day. And so the readers of Good Housekeeping magazine are fully expected to be nutrition experts, right? They're expected to be wise in the ways of nutrition. I myself am a professor of nutrition, and I'm baffled. I try to count calories, and then I find myself thinking, fuck, I have no idea what is this? Who knows how much there is in the boulangerie? Where did we go? The bon pain. Yeah, there we go. The pain quotidien. There were no calories available for this seasonal salad. I had no fucking clue. And yet, of course, everyone's meant to be able to be a conscientious calorie counter. And we laugh when people can't do it properly. And at the same time, we are very ready, in that moment of seriousness there, to applaud when people are taking individual responsibility for a problem that they have absolutely no power over, right? This is a spectacular case of blaming the victim, where we're expected to know everything about the food system and what's in it and not be confused, and at the same time, we're not allowed to blame or expect salvation from government regulators or the food industry. Instead, we just need to step up to the plate and just go it and just be in charge by ourselves, as if individually we could solve a problem that's obviously systemic. And so let's talk about this system, because this system is much more than just out there to cause confusion and sell you stuff you don't need. The system does way more. So let me ask you another question. I'm going to put up a moderately, or depending on how you feel, extremely objectionable statement on the screen here, and I just want you to see whether you agree. When jobs are scarce, men should have more rights to a job than women. So just raise your hand if you agree with that. Anyone? No one? Good for you. Now, interestingly, this was a question that was administered by the Pew Charitable Trusts worldwide. And the country that did the best, the country that came closest to our response rate here was Iceland, with a response rate of 3.6% of people agreeing with that statement. The country that did worst was Egypt, with a 99.6% agreement with that. There's clearly some hidden comedy here that we're going to investigate in question time. But the interesting thing is, why? What explains that? So I'm just going to offer you some explanations, and then you can just pick one. So is it A, the presence or absence of oil in a responding country? Is it religion? Is it underwear advertisements? Is it mainstream media, or is it plow? You can see I'm just spelling out Trump here. But let's just run through. So A, the presence or absence of oil. Anyone? Not a bad. Sometimes the presence or absence of oil can be correlated to certain kinds of attitudes, sexist attitudes in society. Religion. No one's going to raise their hand for religion. Again, is about right. Underwear advertisements. No? You can tell, yeah, I'm struggling there. Mainstream media. Very interesting. To some extent, it's true that the representation of bodies in the media can have profound impacts on viewers. There's a story I wrote about it in Stuffed and Starved about how Fiji, a country that didn't have satellite TV, went from zero rates of bulimia and eating disorders in teenage girls to epidemic rates in 3 years as soon as US cable TV images started to be beamed in. But that doesn't explain these attitudes deep attitudes around women in general, not just body image, but sexism in general. And of course the answer is plows. So the question is why? This is a finding from the Quarterly Journal of Economics, and it's a really important paper. It's a 2013 paper on the origins of gender roles, women, and the plough. It's an important journal article for what it's able to tease out. They look at data stretching back 200 years across a range of countries, and they control for pretty much everything. And the factor that is most able to predict whether a society will be sexist or not is the presence or absence in traditional ways of the plough. Why? What's a plough got to do with sexism? I mean, if we got rid of the plough in America, would our president become less sexist? No, clearly not. So, but what's going on? What's the story with the plough? To tell you this story, you need to understand history. And so we have to go back really to the origins of the modern food system, to the origins of cash agriculture, and to those villains of history, the sort of original bastards, the Portuguese. So here is a map of Portuguese colonial conquest. And one of the interesting islands is this one here, Madeira, which they first encountered in 1419. Does anyone here speak Portuguese, Madeira? So Madeira means wood, and it was, once upon a time, the island of wood. This is what it looks like now. So when sailors first came across it, it was teeming with trees. And of course, what they did initially was chop down the trees and use the timber for shipbuilding and for home construction. And then, on this clear-cut forest, they grew wheat. But then they started to discover that you could do other things on this land. And instead of growing wheat, they started growing, although they started with the world's first major cash crop, a commodity that was going to change the world. Does anyone know what that is? Sugar, right. And so Madeira became the sort of epicenter of modern capitalism. It became a sort of experimental station for how to make the modern food system work. And it required all the things that are part of the modern food system today. So it required domains of private property. It required cash. It required investment and finance. It required workers. It required communities to take care of those workers so that the workers' labor would be cheap. It required energy. In order to refine this sugar, you required a source of fuel. And so those trees stopped being timber, and they were turned by social relations. These are the same trees, right? They're turned from timber into fuel because of modern cash agriculture. And the timber is used to funnel vast quantities of fresh water down into sugarcane fields. Slaves, or initially indigenous people were enslaved, and then slaves from North Africa were brought to the island, and they worked alongside contract laborers to be able to irrigate these vast fields of sugarcane. And of course, sugarcane itself is a finicky crop, right? Sugarcane, it's this grass. You've seen sugarcane, right? It's a grass sort of yay big, and at peak sugar, you have about sort of 2 good days to be able to chop the thing down and then turn it into sugar before you lose the sort of maximum possible yield. And that requires a lot of labor. It requires a lot of work, and that process of chopping down the sugar and then refining it and then sending it back to Europe. That was the sort of origins of cash agriculture, this sort of cycle of money coming from Europe to invest in the frontier on Madeira. The frontier was then destroyed. It took about sort of 50 to 75 years to burn through this island. Right? Europe ate the sugar, and the sugar ate the island. And by the early 1500s, it was possible for travelers to come to this island and say, well, why is it called Madeira? There's no wood here at all. It had been burned through. And so then they had to invent the sort of next generation of crop, and they had to iterate and bring their new technologies. And the thing that they replaced sugar with was, does anyone know? Grapes. Grapes were less intensive in terms of water, in terms of labor, and certainly in terms of fuel. And so they made wine. but they destroyed the forest so comprehensively that the barrels for the wine had to come from the New World. Right? They had to bring the barrels across the Atlantic to this tiny island to make Madeira wine, because Europe had denuded its forests so significantly, and by the time it came to producing Madeira wine, Madeira had done the same thing. So these relationships of ownership, of transformation, of power, are right there at the beginning of the food system, right? This is the 1400s. But that history is something to latch onto, and there are specific contours of it. But I just want to sort of share with you that the sugar circuit is one of many, many circuits that were required to make the modern food system. And in order for the food system to work, you needed to venture out and colonize and control and send profits back. So that, this is just sort of something worth meditating on. In order for this food system to work, it required that Europe controlled the planet. This map actually sort of underestimates, if anything, the amount of the planet that was controlled by Europe. Japan, it's true that Japan was never colonized by Europe, but it very certainly fell under European control and influence. So you've got most of the planet needing to be colonized and controlled and owned and manipulated in certain ways. And agricultural technologies flowed through these circuits of power. And it wasn't just about controlling the planet, it was also about refining these technologies of power and control. So for example, in England, you can see here transformations that happened through the 1700s. And what you see is land here in purple. In 1730, this was land owned by the University of Cambridge, and most of it was the commons. The commons, you hear the term today, commons, and it's like the paved over bit of a shopping mall where the fountain is, right? That's the commons. But originally, the commons was, or you may think of the commons as a park, but the commons was always both land and the skills that people had to govern the commons. So let me give you an example. You hear about the tragedy of the commons, right? Does everyone know the tragedy of, what is the tragedy of the commons? Yes, you mistakenly raised your hand towards your head, but I'm just going to ask you. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Does anyone know what the tragedy of the commons? Yes, sir.
The shared commodity and eventually human nature, or the theory is human nature will eventually cause someone to overextend their use and then it fucks it up for everyone else.
There you go. That's an utterly concise and plausible demonstration of the idea of the tragedy of the commons. I mean, look, imagine we're a village and we have a forest, and we get to, nobody owns the forest, and so if nobody owns the forest, who is to stop us from going in and chopping down trees and shooting squirrels? I don't know why we would do that. But doing pellets, squirrel pellets. That's why we would do that. Or foraging for nuts and berries, whatever it is. Now the tragedy lies in the fact that although we recognize that we need the forest for our survival, with eyes wide open, we will chop down the last tree because we're so selfish that therein lies the tragedy, that nobody owns it, and we are selfish individuals, and the tragedy lies in the fact that without private property, we will destroy the very forest on which we depend. The thing is, of course, the commons in real life was never like that. The commons was actually a place in which people thrived and did things like stinting. Again, the stinting is not a word that you've heard, but have you heard the word stinting before? Have you heard unstinting? That surely was on an SAT test back in the day. Unstinting. When you're unstinting in your labours, you're someone who works very hard at something. So to stint is to hold back. And to stint with wood, for example, was an art of living on the commons. So in fact, when you think of the tragedy of the commons, you're misremembering the way the commons worked. Every civilization, particularly among indigenous civilizations, there usually is the art of not consuming something this year because you need it next year. That is, in older English, called stinting. And in order to stop people doing that and to depend on the commons, people needed to be kicked off the commons. And so the commons got privatized. And so all of a sudden, increasingly, you have bits of land chopped up so that individual farmers can reap the maximum reward from it. And so from having a big commons in 1730, by the 1850s, you have individual parcels of land on which you can run modern agricultural technology, like the plow. And so this is what that land looks like today. And again, it's sort of parcels of land on which you can run a big combine and use genetically modified crops and all the rest of it. But you needed to kick people off who depended on that land. And in particular, you needed to kick off women. I mean, on the commons, for example, would be land that could be used for dairying. But if you enclose the commons, if you stop, if you make it impossible for herds of cattle to be grazed on that land, and instead you require that on that land you can only have ploughed furrows, then you start mechanisms of gender discrimination. Because what you do is, when dairying is women's work and you prescribe that, then all of a sudden women's labour is, there's less return on women's labour, there's less independence of their income. And instead, if you say what you want to do with this land is plough it, and you pay men more to do that, you start this process of unequal pay for similar work that reaches its nadir through the 1800s, and which we still live today. And if you want to see what this looks like, I mean, there's a picture that I like that shows the modern food system in all its glory, and it's this picture of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews by Thomas Gainsborough in 1750. This is the modern food system, right here. Everything that's important about the modern food system is to be found in this portrait. It's an unusual portrait because when you look at it initially, people used to look at it and think, oh, look at that, it's the English countryside, isn't it magic? And this is actually a real bit of English countryside. It is the estate that this man, Thomas Andrews, oh God, I've forgotten his first name. Mr. Andrews, we will call him until his name returns to me. Robert Andrews is his name. Robert Andrews married Frances, then Andrews, and they united their estates, and it actually looks like this, and you can see that tree still today in England on the Aubrey's estate. But when you look at it a little more closely, a number of things should trouble. First of all, you, for example, have enclosed land here. You can see there land that may have once been used for cattle or may have been used for peasants to be able to survive. They have been kicked off and turned into wage labourers. And you don't see the peasants, but you see the products of their work. Nice, neat rows here of sheaves of wheat and rows that have been drilled, perhaps using a seed drill, modern agricultural technology, and certainly ploughed using modern agricultural technology. And the seed drill here was invented in 1705 by Jethro Tull, which I just like saying Jethro Tull. You're probably too young to understand how funny that is. But Jethro Tull invented it in 1705, but even by 1750, it wasn't widely used. It actually became more widely used about 100 years later. This is a cutting-edge farm, right? This is bleeding-edge agricultural science. This man had a number of articles in peer-reviewed journals of his day, including things like How to Profit from a Modern Farm. So this is an agricultural research station of the finest caliber. But the workers have been expelled, right? You don't see them. You only see the fruits of their labor. That makes it very modern, right? Where the fruits of modern labor are really hidden from the eye, where you can think about food without ever thinking to think about the hands or the systems that made that possible. But look at Mr. Andrews here, Robert Andrews. He's a fop, a dandy, someone who is wearing, I mean, those clothes are fashion code for as louche as it's possible to be in public while still being clothed. He's wearing a kind of kiss the chef apron. I mean, the 1750s hunting gear was something that people weren't usually painted in because it was so casual. But here, he's looking at you and saying, "Fuck it, I own this." It is. And he does, right? He owns the dog, he owns the gun, he owns all of that. And very interestingly, he owns his wife. I mean, look at her posture, by contrast. She is not in any way relaxed. She is absolutely upright, her shoes incredibly dainted, not at all designed to be outdoors. Her new role was to be confined to the home as a bourgeois woman, to be responsible for things like cooking and for managing the household. And possibly there's a blank piece of canvas here where some people speculate that a future child would have been painted in. But this portrait shows utterly a world of ownership and domination that's intimately related to the food system, right? This is how the plow gets to be part of a system that shapes enduring sexism in modern society. Because in order for this portrait to obtain, women need to be, the role of women in capitalist society has to be transformed. And in this particular case, Frances Andrews needs to be instructed about about her new roles in the home. And King James I in England actually had manuals on household management. Just as the king would rule over his subjects, the man of the house would be given domain over this new institution, the household. And that's why it's possible to, it had to be educated. You needed to break old systems in which there was relatively more equality, and women's roles needed to be transformed, and the food system was right there at the heart of it. It's not something accidental. The food system made that possible, made it thinkable. And the food system sort of crops up in Mrs. Andrews' life in other ways. So, for example, on her shelves, there would be new books about her new duty. So a bestseller in 1608 was this one, Sir Hugh Platt's Delights for Ladies to Adorn Their Persons, Tables, Closets, and Distilleries with Beauties, Bouquets, Perfumes, and Waters. The titles were a little longer back in those days. But the idea, but this did sell well because there were, this was a time of immense change. You'll remember that map that has all the flows of commodities flowing from across the world. All that stuff was coming, and in particular was coming to England, this sort of capitalist metropole, and people were baffled. There was, for example, sort of strange food from Peru that people didn't really know what to do with, and in the end, initially they started just feeding it to their horses. They were like, this stuff is weird and strange, and then they had to be instructed in, no, you can cook this, and you can boil it, which is the British national cooking technique. You can boil the living hell out of it, and reduce its flavour to nothing, but still you can eat it. Or you can fry it, or you do, and this strange new thing was the potato. And we can think of that as bizarre now, but we are still part of that system. We are still being educated in strange new foods from Peru that we don't know what to do with. For example, raise your hands if you have eaten quinoa. Raise your hands if 10 years ago you had eaten quinoa. So how is it that you were persuaded to eat a food that basically tastes like gravel? What was it about, how is it that you find yourself saying, quinoa, of course quinoa, why not? I'm in California, the national food is quinoa, but nothing to do with it. The idea of quinoa is, again, the strange Peruvian food, and we are caught up in these systems of international exchanges of food where we are baffled, and then we need to be persuaded, and so you need nutritional experts like Sir Hugh Platt, or one of my favorite nutritional experts is this guy, George Cheney. So his 1733 masterpiece is called The English Malady. For those of you who don't know, the English malady, actually for those of you who don't know, can you guess what the English malady is? It's obesity. And this is interesting, right? So he writes a book about obesity, which is something that's afflicting the English ruling classes. They are getting a lot of food, a lot of calories, not much exercise, and not to just make the sort of equivalent of calories and exercise equals obesity, but there's something very wrong with the way that people approach their food in 18th century England, and George Cheney, MD, is there to help diagnose. But he's not just there to help diagnose, he's also there present new ways for us to think about things. So what's important about this book is not just that it's a treatise on obesity, but it comes with the author's own case at large. So what he does is uses a very old literary form, the confession. And he says, look, I used to be just hugely overweight, and then I did this to myself, and I took full responsibility, just like Miriam Aaron's Good Housekeeping readers, right? This is the origins of that. I took responsibility of managing my diet, irrespective of whether the food system is actually created by these long chains of colonialism and transformations in the food system. He's not writing an anti-colonial text, he's writing a text about how you manage your body and you should take full responsibility for it. And in that way, it's sort of a restoration Oprah. Right? He was, by his own admission, quite large. He presented himself as Europe's heaviest man. He said he weighed 500 pounds. But what's interesting here is that this is kind of an early form of fat shaming. Right? This is a moment in which we are encouraged to look on a particular body and be repelled by it. And in which this body is produced by deficits of will, and perhaps a little bit of deficit of knowledge, but mainly all it takes is the right kind of attitude toward yourself and the right kind of diet, and you can shed the right kind of weight. But you first have to be repelled by yourself, and so one of the ways he talks about himself and his body here is that it was a putrefied, overgrown body from luxury and perpetual laziness, scorbutical all over, right? So this is a process of instruction of the creation of the individual consumer and the individual self-hating consumer. But if we're interested in issues around body shaming, around fat shaming, then here's where a systemic problem gets transformed and transmuted into something that only you can do individually. It's something that needs and can only be addressed individually, the right kind of diet. And he has one. He has a what to eat guide that has its own sort of history of iatromechanics, is the idea. That basically you have easy to digest things and hard to digest things, and so easy to digest is sort of spring vegetables and hares and sheep and kids, which, not children. And then less easy to digest these slightly more sort of luxurious items. But in the end, this is an early form of the kinds of confusion we saw at the beginning. And that's the idea, that the confusion around what to put in our bodies is not a bug in the modern food system, it's a feature, right? So if you're interested in the food system, think about not only the sexism, but also what gets produced as a result of that sexism. Is that sort of confusion around how it is that we relate to our food, and how it's mediated by nutritional experts, how it is that the way we come to approach our bodies is as something to loathe and correct, and not to see as something produced through a system, but through individual deficits of the will, which we need to be masters of, even though that very system has been made possible only through large systems of colonialism and capitalism. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through some of the other ideas. We can talk about these later on, about how it is that we're going to feed the 9 billion, because I know there's something that's cropped up this week. But if you're interested, we can and should talk about that in question. But we have the idea of the sort of green revolution as if we're going to solve the food problem, then we need to control population, and we need to have more of those furrows and more ploughed land and more productive crops. This man, Norman Borlaug, is going to save us all, and the Green Revolution now, we're just going to just blah blah blah. But I do want to talk about what it is that we can do differently, given, as I say, the ideas of sexism that are in the food system, that are inherent in the modern food system, but also thinking about how it is that we've become hooked on cheap food and an abundance of particular kinds of calories and particular ways of eating. And so to think about how do we fix this? Because clearly getting rid of plows is not going to end sexism. What do we do? How do we think about this issue about gender and the world that food has made in ways that we can do something with? And so here is a series of issues, and I'm going to ask you to address this actually. Here's the problem. In Malawi in the year 2000, things are pretty bad. And they're bad as, you know, in northern Malawi where the story I want to tell you begins. There's a nurse at a neonatal rehabilitation unit. A neonatal rehabilitation unit is where kids who are so malnourished that they are at the, you know, at death's door come to be rehabilitated so they can survive a few more days. And the nurse at this neonatal rehabilitation unit knows why children are coming. She knows because life expectancy is 46 years old in Malawi. And that's because the HIV/AIDS prevalence is 14%. And children are, you know, 55%, more than half of children are stunted. They're so deprived of nutrients in the first 1,000 days of life that they will never reach their full potential. And they're living on less than 50 cents per day, per person. And she's like, I can tell you why this is happening. This is happening because people are only eating Malawi's staple crop, corn. And so, you know, what she's saying is, well, we need to diversify these crops. Unfortunately, because of institutions like the World Bank and the European Union and the United States Agency for International Development, the country had been put on an austerity regime. You know, social service governments had been shrunk, and there was no money for things like agricultural extension. There was no money for the government to give away seeds for people to be able to try and experiment with things. Luckily, so someone from the same church as Esther, you know, the nurse at this neonatal rehabilitation unit, found money to start experimenting with seeds. And so the farmers themselves became scientists. Initially, about 165 farmers started futzing around with seed and trying to grow different things together. And from 165, it grew to about 5,000 farmers who were growing different kinds of crops next to each other. And they found that if you grow, you know, if you follow the milpa system, for example, if you grow corn and beans and squash together, you're able to get as much corn as you got before, and well, I mean, you get to see it here. I mean, you get to have squash, which is, you get to eat the squash. You get the squash blossom that attracts beneficial insects. You have big fat squash leaves that shade out weeds. You get the beans, which are protein sources and which help fix nitrogen in the soil, and then you get the corn that everyone loves. And so they're able to get 50% more protein and as much corn as through industrial agriculture. So here's the problem. The farmer research teams observe that it's possible for there to be more food and for children to be more malnourished. Why? How can you have more food coming out of the ground and increase child malnutrition? Yeah?
Well, raise my hand. Maybe that food is being exported.
Maybe that food's being exported. Well, there's certainly an international market for corn, but this stuff is for their own consumption, and they're pretty good about making sure that this stays in the community. So it's not going anywhere else. It's not following those trade circuits. It's actually sovereign. They're in control of it. How can you have more food and children's malnutrition goes up? How does that work? Yes?
Maybe the new foods weren't going to the kids, but rather the adults.
Maybe the foods are going to the kids, are not going to the kids. No, I mean, in general, you know, people are good about sharing it. I mean, you know, there is some, you know, there are cases where if the food is incredibly scarce, then, you know, it'll go to usually the male head of house in order for them to be able to go and get enough energy to go earn wages to bring back. But here you've got an abundance. You've got more food. Yes, ma'am.
Food isn't nutritious.
The food, but this is more nutritious food than you had before, right? Before you just had corn. Now you've got beans, you've got squash, you've got a whole bunch of different things. How are we going to get more food, ladies and gentlemen? And, yes, more kids. So this is the sort of Malthusian moment where it's like, oh, well, we've got beans, let's shag. It doesn't quite work that way. So it's not. It's yes, sir.
Child labor?
Child labor? No. I mean, it is a sort of a particular observation that in low income and in the global south on farming communities, kids do work. But that doesn't explain this story. You're not going to get it, are you? Oh, yeah, the last one. Yes.
Were they getting processed food from the town?
They weren't getting processed food from the town. This was staying pretty much there. But yes, all right, go on.
So the kids were only eating the beans and
No, it wasn't like beans are kids' food, and grown-ups shall not touch the beans because there will be flatulence. No, do you really want to go on then? Yeah.
Biofuels?
Sorry?
Is it all being turned into biofuels?
It wasn't being turned into biofuels. No, the residue is being fed to animals. There is some animal agriculture, but no, it's not being turned into biofuels. Here's the answer. In fact, here's the answer. Harvesting is women's work, and harvesting is women's work because women want to control the sale of the crop. So this is a victory, right? To be able to harvest is to be able to be in charge of the bounty that comes in. And what's interesting is there's more food, so there's more to harvest. But if there's more to harvest, other things that are women's work are cooking and cleaning and fetching firewood and breastfeeding. And so it's possible because the harvesting goes up and you still have to cook and clean and fetch fire, that the breastfeeding goes down and the quality of meals goes down as well. Do you see how that works? Right? More food, more harvesting for her, but then she has less time to cook and breastfeed. How do you solve that problem? Get men to harvest. No, you don't get men to harvest, because what they're worried about is that sometimes, not always, but it does happen, and it happens enough, that men will sell to the lowest bidder, be in charge of the household income, and sometimes go out and get drunk. And so women have fought hard to control household income. So you don't want that. So what do? Yes?
Make men cook?
Yes! How do you do that? The answer is make men cook. How do you do that? How do you make men cook? No answers. Go on strike. We could do that. Give him a grill. Initially what they do, they try something, basically they try the food network approach. They go around door to door, and they go with someone from the farmer research team and a nutritionist, and they're like, man of the house, come out here. You may have seen your wife hunched over this. It's a pot. Man of the house, like, I've always wondered how this works. And so they'll have a joyful cooking experience. And then they'll have a delicious meal together, and then the farmer research team and the cook will go off into the distance, and nothing will change. And in a sense, you wouldn't expect it to. Just like the Food Network, I mean, you don't watch the Food Network to end patriarchy. The food, that's not what it's for. The Food Network is entertainment. And so that entertainment part is important, but they came up with a different experiment. This was the first iteration, it didn't work, so they tried something else. They did something called recipe days. And on recipe days, men, women, and children get together, about 100 men, women, and children, and everyone teaches everyone else. They gamify this experience, right? They turn it into a competition. And in the contest, it means that since everyone's competing for the prize, people teach each other. And so men teach other men, which is strange in that context. But it also becomes a space of equality where women can teach men. And it also becomes a political space where women get to call men out on our shit. And you get to have discussions around patriarchy. And you also get to have discussions between daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law. And it becomes a venue for political conversations that in the home would just be a quarrel, and in this bigger space become a moment of feminist organizing. And then they follow it up with door-to-door feminist organizing. And I want to show you what this looks like, because it's not easy, but it can have some dramatic consequences. So what I want to do, I'm working on a film with one of America's great documentary filmmakers, a guy called Steve James. He did Hoop Dreams, which if you haven't seen Hoop Dreams, you need to see Hoop Dreams. One of the greatest American documentaries of the past 50 years. But he and I have been working on this film for about 5 years, and hopefully we'll finish it in the next year or so. And this is a clip from it that shows you what recipe days are like. See, no, that's not going to auto load. Do that.
We love
Tangika soda na tushuga pachoko waka na mafuta tangutako pasi pachoko na tumchere taikako sota taikako vile ngwene utumika pa moto
basa zikutapa vapsa mbatu tora mafuta tumika pa moto pasifia na tumika pa moto
tindanjire mbungwe chiwangwereza bungwe chibwani kwa ngeko funyira mikoka yetu tikakalanga mukusizikira vose vintu kabwiranga ndini kwabwana na kupika kupenja dende kwali kulima kukucherera kukaenda tengerana na kubeka inacheranga ndini mbechi kwako kutitatola kuma 2000 kweni nyimbo yose yako nyuma vanga kuti kala ine nina ntumbo nyake mwana wa kumsana tachelewa tose kumunda ndio tupate kufuma kumunda tikwenda iwe nyanya kwenda waka uchopo kamba papa ndio tupate kufika pana nyumba mwetu au karawa kapambamba hapo chete kweni kwa sono na mutikanjira mbugwe wakati samiza vagenda kuti mwanarume angagwira ntchito za shanakazi mbuto hii ni za sono ni ilamkapokapo imwesha kweni icho chikumbira chakuti nge mungalimbikiranga nangaulika pachoko dongo ndasinthani kwene imwesha
tuona tunalitu tukukwa limonani kwene kuno kwetu ndikutanga takhalira
kuno mwakhalira nani ndipo swapo kusuzga chomene kuno mwanyitu mwanarume chigaya chinu chitu chakubava muvipwikisika makoracha vagenda ngekatila tikayanga poda zero pala mlango chakaika
sitingakwanisi kana tukuwa sanga watereka nkale
wechikwa cha kusuzera ya mlango chikwa cha kusuzera mumechembe chamba
so wanyani mafika utatamcheza wewe sanga tini nafuata kwini nde ungwene mwe icho chujipikira mwakali wepala na
ya imangaseta ya mlango kutona mukuona mlango olo mu Bible viri kulembeka kuti ndikupangirenge moviji uyo wakalenga Adamu chiuta akalenga Adamu nakuyoya tukasema kuti munthu lawana phukwa uchitachita ukhalakhala uta ndikupangire po movili munthu wakuti wakuvilengeko mwanakazi damu lake isi tiwa uvili vadi
so kuti muleke vana chakusuza lekanile vilani kwenewa kuti nti mwana wafuma kuti ndikukapa kwenganana tikasipana ukapa ana nilikile njani suzwa iyi kuinga kakumoa mwakazi na utowa panyumba kweni mbongisanga kuti ipo nikhale nilele vana vana kulekela wanyaku vana vanga kwanisika cha suzwa ipapakale inenga nipumvakana iwo ndio ushauri kwa kambura kuliana naina nimbakana
That's not ending in a particularly upbeat way, but of course if you want a happy ending that depends of course on where you stop your story. I stopped it there in 2015 in part because it's it's important to understand that this is hard, and overcoming centuries of patriarchy is not easy. But I was there last August, and Winston has finally gotten with the program. He is much less of an ass. He is heading the village climate change team. We saw him cooking with his wife and looking after the kids. And basically, he's come around. And it only took 4 years. I mean, it took 4 years, but it only took 4 years. And at $8 per person per year, it's one of the most cost-effective ways of transforming food systems. And if you want me to sort of show you what this looks like, you know, in terms of data, under 5 stunting in Malawi nationally has barely budged. It was 55, it's now 45. But if you look at the neonatal rehabilitation unit that takes kids from this particular area, then admissions have gone from over 250 down to basically single digits. And that's happened through a combination of things. It's yes about men cooking, it's about agroecology, it's about making sure that there's good sanitation and healthcare, it's about making sure that that there's access to savings and credit and secure food supply and a range of other things. But the bottom line is that what matters here is transforming gender relations. It's about remaking the world that food has made. And we know that this is a global story. I mean, stunting increases with gender inequality, and it decreases when girls go to secondary school. But that doesn't happen by magic. It takes work. It takes organizing to remake the world that food has made. And I guess I just want to reprise what it is that we've covered here. The world food system is not just about the farm to fork transitions, right? It's about labor. It's about communities that make labor happen, make work happen. It's about a relationship to the land, whether you burn through your soil and your trees, as you do in Madeira, or whether you build soil and you build water, you farm water, and you work with systems that are already there to build soil fertility and build for nutrition. Whether you change the social structures around finance, whether you change the social structures around education, around the norms of who gets to work and who gets to care. All of this stuff has been challenged very effectively there in Malawi. And there are stories like this from around the world. I mean, I'm excited about this Malawi one because it's from one of the poorest places on earth, and they've ended hunger in Africa. I mean, this is a model that ends one of the most persistent scourges that's meant to be, in one of the most God-forsaken places on earth, and certainly one of the poorest countries on earth, and they've done it by themselves, without miracle, genetically modified crops or anything else. But it's required fighting and transforming gender relations. Which again, if we're thinking about the plough and its technologies and the origins of inequality, is also something that's about the modern food system. But that's only something that happens through work and through organizing. It doesn't happen by buying organic or shopping local or eating quinoa, God forbid. It does require a much more capacious understanding of both what the food system is, but also what we can do to change it. I think that's actually one of the uplifting parts of this story, that actually we're more powerful than just people who shop for food or who get food on a meal plan or whatever it is. The food system is bigger than we think it is, but we are more powerful than we've been led to believe. And if we embrace that power, there's no end to what it is that we can reimagine in terms of a better world food system. And that would be a good place to take your questions. Thanks very much. Questions? Yes, sir.
I can't imagine that the yellow corn that they were growing and the soybeans that they're growing are GMOs, right?
No, they're not GMOs. The soybeans you saw there were hybrid seed because they're trying to find soybeans that are, that come from local sources. But soybeans, as you know, are not native to sub-Saharan Africa in the same way that corn isn't. But they're working with an international peasant group called La Via Campesina to develop seed sharing systems in southern Africa so that they don't have to depend on hybrid soy, but can actually grow their own varieties and do their own agricultural science. But this is only a few years into a project that's, you know, this is about reinventing the food system and reinventing channels and ways of getting seed. You can't do it all at once. And they've done quite a lot at once, but there's still a little ways to go. Yes? Yeah, I'm happy to, can I restate again how it is that the plough is this accompaniment to gender inequality? In order for modern agriculture to happen, there was a process in England and around the world of enclosure, where the commons, where women and men were relatively equal in terms of being able to access land, became privatized, and men owned it. And in the privatizing of that land, you reduced the amount of space that peasants could survive. In particular, you kicked the peasants off the land, and it meant that, for example, women couldn't run their cattle over the commons because there wasn't any commons left for them to run it on. Dairying, so the skills that they developed dairying were only in demand a couple of times a year. Other than that, women's work in agriculture had been corralled and in quarantine. The plough, on the other hand, was this fantastic new technology that was being used to be able to increase yields as part of a package of other things, of other kinds of agricultural technology on this privatized land. And so it's a mixture of social systems and agricultural technology and straightforward chauvinism. And they come together in one tidy package that's about creating a new pool of agricultural labor, creating new ways of owning and mastering land, and coming up with new relationships to nature. And women are, in that process, denied access to certain kinds of work. When they are working, they're paid less. And that's one of the, that again is the tilt of how it is that the plough is part of a package of things that creates gender inequality. So it's not like the plough comes along and all of a sudden everything goes to shit. It's possible to imagine the plough as part of a sustainable form of agricultural development. So for example, in Malawi, the plough might be able to be used in plots of land that people share, where women and men are, and in fact they do use ploughs in this example, where there is gender equality. So it's not just that there's the plough, but the plough is a sign of all the other things that come along with capitalist agriculture, and that's the signature of modern colonial agriculture. Does that make sense? I mean, even if you don't believe it, does that make sense as an explanation? Because there's certainly, as I say, the Quarterly Journal of Economics has the data. What they don't have, and what they're still casting around for, is an explanation. Because their data doesn't go back to the 14th century. But if you look historically, you can explain why it is that they're seeing what they're seeing. Other questions? Oh, yes, there we are.
Going back to Malawi.
Malawi. Mm-hmm.
And have you seen sort of any routes through which people might become sort of actively around re-indigenizing their cuisine? It seems like the whole continent is just space for the introduction of non-indigenous crops.
Mm-hmm.
Huge spaces for cacao and corn. So have you seen that, or are there any?
Oh, but you're asking actually two parallel questions. There's one about re-indigenizing cuisine, and there's one about moving away from cash crops. And the two aren't necessarily the same. I mean, for example, there are crops in Malawi, or to use Peru. I mean, there's nothing more indigenous to Peru than quinoa. But the question there is, the cuisine is indigenous, but is it a cash crop? Do they have control over it, or is it part of the circuits of the global market or not? So let's separate out the questions. One is, are people interested in eating exclusively land races and food that come from sub-Saharan Africa? And the answer in general is no. Because if you go to, and this is interesting because in general, the word peasant carries with it the idea of people being hopelessly backward, right? And yet if you go to a Malawian peasant backyard, you'll see aubergine, eggplant, and you'll see, which is an Asian crop, and you'll see tomato, which is a New World crop, and so you'll see a range of different things, and people like them. So it's not like in the same way that corn is now the staple crop of Malawi and it has nothing to do with Malawi. Or wheat is the staple crop of Mozambique, and it doesn't even grow there. And people need bread every day because of colonialism, because of the Portuguese came. Again, these fuckers, the Portuguese, they came and they inculcated this desire, this daily desire for bread. These things are part of what has become a national cuisine. And so the idea of we must have only native land races doesn't have much appeal, and particularly since soybeans are kind of awesome. Genetically modified soybeans are bad, but soy is a fantastic plant. I mean, its protein profile is terrific. It's really hardy. It's good for the soil. It's not a bad thing, and people are learning to make things like soy milk with it, and they're loving it. So. The indigeneity of crops isn't necessarily an important thing, but what people are interested in is what's going to work given climate change. And it turns out that sorghum and millet are much more robust when the rains don't come on time. And so people are rediscovering heritage crops and intercropping between crops like corn, where they actually quite like the corn. So there's definitely some intercropping and rediscovery of heritage breeds. But it's not about re-indigenizing in that way. But people are also moving away from these sort of global commodity circuits, and again, our government, by our I mean the United States government, but also the European Union are sort of down there saying, hey, you should sell this on the global market. You will become not millionaires or even thousandaires, but you'll become a little bit richer, and won't that be good for everyone? And setting up these commodity chains, just basically hooks farmers into these global circuits, and it's rare to find cases where particularly small-scale farmers and farmers on this kind of 1 acre or less plot land can really win from that. So in general, it's not terribly promising and not terribly exciting to. But people are looking forward to, are trying to disconnect themselves from these global commodity systems. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, one critique of globalization is that farmers in Malawi or other countries oftentimes aren't able to sell on domestic markets. So you have a lot of stuff commodity stuff that will come in and kind of overwhelm things. Do you think it's worth also connecting women with sort of regional or local markets and making credit available for integrating food crop sales with other kinds of household endeavors like weaving, thatch roof? Like most peasant households actually have a number of enterprises that are keeping them afloat. Crops are bad, something else is working. So what's your sense? I mean, this is very much a vision of like local agriculture and very much village-based and household-based agriculture working, but is there also a role for local markets?
Yes. And that was their idea as well, right? I mean, that's the really exciting thing about having these farmer research teams being social scientists and natural scientists, right? Here's a bunch of people who aren't waiting for someone from the Gates Foundation to tell them what to do. They're doing experiments all the time. The reason to tell you about the failed experiment to get men to cook is to point out that they're trying a bunch of things. Not all of it works, but they're trying, right? These are scientists. They're running experiments, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So one of the experiments that has worked is something called the climate change stove. It was something that one of the women in the village had seen down south, and so she came back with this idea of what we're going to do is make these stoves that require way less wood to burn. And they're called climate change stoves because climate change has made wood much scarcer. They use much less wood in these stoves, and they sell them in the local market. And they also set up credit circles to be able to bankroll their access to these markets. And it was going very well until 2014, when you saw a slight uptick in admissions to the neonatal rehabilitation unit, because in 2014, the IMF devalued, the International Monetary Fund devalued Malawi's currency as punishment for overspending by the government, and people got hungry as a result. There are ways in which the international economy still punishes Malawi, and that gets propagated down to the village level. But one of the ways that they insulate themselves is by having local markets and local grain stores, local control over. So at the harvest time, they sell to a village collective the grain that they have at a moderately high price, and then when it comes time to the hunger season, which is just, there's in most agrarian societies, there's something called the hunger season. When would you imagine that that happens? When's the hunger season? Right before the harvest, right? I mean, you've got green corn there, and if you wait just a month, it'll turn into yellow corn and it'll be awesome. But the hunger season is that period where the food from last year's run out, and you can see it right in front of you, but you can't take it out unless you're incredibly desperate. That hunger season gets smoothed out by local grain stores, and that requires local credit and local infrastructure. So absolutely, you're absolutely right. There is a diversification as well, away from just we must grow our own food to we must be in charge of our local economy, and that's a much bigger ask again, and a much more potent one. And yeah, I mean, it's they're lucky that they haven't had grain prices so crippled by the international economy that this has been wiped out, but it has been a problem. Yes, ma'am.
So you made a really interesting statement that like the confusion around like what to like put into our bodies and like what to actually eat, which I know is something that catches a lot, is like a feature of the modern food system. And I guess like what could you just like explain a little bit more about that? Like why exactly like is that like built into our system or like beneficial like for it?
So that statement about confusion, which is the sort of constant state of the modern consumer, is something that, in part, it's a way of pushing back against my colleague Michael Pollan, whose advice is eat like your grandma did. But most people's grandmas, and the sort of more the whiter and more European those grandmas were, the more confused they were, the more removed from a food system that was that made sense. The fact is, most people's grandmas were also confused by the world food system and were confounded by it, and that's been going on really since its origins are in the 1450s. So that's a lot of grandmas back that you have to go to be able to find some sort of pure food system. And so that was a sort of primary reason for saying that the confusion is actually right there at the beginning of the food system. But that confusion about what to eat is made possible by globalization, which before it was called globalization, it was called colonialism, and the circuits of food from around the world that get propelled from Peru to Ireland to the United Kingdom and then down the spice route. So the voyage of things like potatoes. The confusion around that is, what the hell is this? We've got some new food, and we also have some new health claims about that food. And we also have some, and I notice that my body now is doing certain things, and I'm being encouraged to take responsibility for this body, but I don't really know how to do that. And I'm being discouraged from thinking systemically about why I feel this way, and why I move in the world this way, and why the world looks this way. So it must be my fault, just like the readers of Good Housekeeping magazine. So if it's my fault, then someone help me out, and that's why the industry of nutritional advice and good housekeeping exists. But that's part of something that you see from the 1600s, where people are coming along and telling you what to do because you're baffled, because there's you're particularly for bourgeois women in Europe, that confusion is something that comes with the transformation of being quarantined into the household, right? Where you have these new gender roles that are about you must produce children and turn up to church and cook and manage the home. So all of a sudden, household management becomes a thing you have to study. And so you're encouraged to adopt a new role. You're not really told very much about it, other than what you read in the book, which isn't terribly helpful. And so your connection with the food, with seasons, with what stuff is and how it is that you will, whether the stuff is good for you or not, all of that is sundered. And instead, what you have are these manuals that will tell you, more or less, up against one another, that this stuff is good for you. No, it's not good for you. It's bad for you. No, it's good for you. And so, the butter versus margarine wars of our time were prosecuted in the 1700s, and so that's the idea of the modern food system breeding confusion. And then you ask the question, well, so who does that benefit? Well, it certainly benefits nutritionists, and it benefits the industry of, like I said, that restoration Oprah was meant to be a provocation. The idea that there are people who are taking this idea of the new consumer self and telling you how to act on it that industry is old. And you know, whatever your favorite diet is, it has an antecedent that's 300 years before it. So you know, there are people making money off that, and there are people making money off the new thing that's going to solve the problem that the food system created in the first place, whether that's magic meat or you know, genetically modified yada yada. So again, you know, in a sense, the sort of new products of the food system are like the vacuum cleaner salesman who comes to you, the apocryphal, you've never seen this. I know you have. There used to be door-to-door vacuum cleaner salesmen who would come to your house and dump shit on your carpet and then hoover it up, mostly, and this would be the great power of the thing that they were selling you. And that's sort of what the food system's about now. It's like, well, you know, this thing has low cholesterol and it's trans fat free and it's salt. Or you know, whatever it is, you know, you can find gluten-free salt now, for example, which for those of you who don't appreciate that, there's no gluten in salt at all. You know, it's a bizarre idea, but you know, all of a sudden we have these new anxieties around. Well, yeah, does it have gluten in it? I don't like gluten. It's killed. My parents were killed by gluten, and so you know, you just remove gluten from everything, including things that don't have it. So that idea of these anxieties are very profitable because you know you'll see this sort of cavalcade of labels on things, which you are encouraged to understand as virtuous and as good for you in some way. And the minute you're sucked into that, you've become this. You know, you've read your body as this individual temple into which you're the only gatekeeper, as opposed to understanding that your body and your attitudes to it are produced through a society that you have the power to change, but you're being discouraged from thinking about. Does that make sense? Yes.
So you gave an example in Malawi of a model of reforming the food system that's based on how food is produced, but a community-based model where that focuses on how people produce food and people cook food, for example. How do you reform the food system if, like the US, where the majority of people are like disconnected from food production and even like food cooking because of processing needs?
That's a great question. So, and the question is, well, you know, that's all very well. This is Malawi, but what about the United States? What has this to do with us? How do we transform the food system? Well, I mean, in a sense, there's a low-level observation here, which is that what's hard about Malawi is organizing for gender equality, and that's something that we need to see more of in the United States as well, right? I mean, that's just, again, that's a no-brainer. If you look at who is hungry in the United States, 1 in 3 female-headed households in the United States is food insecure. If you look at student hunger, women are more likely to report food insecurity as students than men. Now that's that's just a sort of daily example of sexism in the United States. But what's interesting here is that there's both the sort of pushing away of old models and the embrace of new ones. We need resistance and we need the sort of creative action. One of the places that I've seen this work very well is Brazil. Brazil has, for those of you who aren't familiar, the landless rural peasant movement, the MST. You raise your hand if you heard of the MST. Those of you have, it's Noam Chomsky. You know Noam. Raise your hand if you heard of Noam fucking Chomsky. Okay, Noam Chomsky says that the MST is the world's most important social movement, he says this because they embody a sort of spirit of activism that's really very broad in the way that you're wanting to see in the United States. So what they do, for example, is, again in Brazil, agriculture is dominated by large landholders, and there's a lot of urban poverty. And what they do is work in slums in Brazil, in the favelas, to take communities, to take families from there and resettle them on land that they just take over. No one's using it, and so they take over this land and they start farming. And they grow, so they're better off in terms of food security, in terms of crime, in terms of a bunch of other things. And then they get engaged in public policy. So not only do they occupy land, they fight for land reform, which is something we need in the United States, right? We need land reform in this country. We need to figure out ways that young people can farm, also figure out ways that because there's a lot more demand for farmland than there is availability. The average age of US farmers is going up and up, and it's 56 now. But there are a lot of young people who would quite like to farm and just can't afford to because farmland is so expensive. So certainly, understanding that there is a large unmet demand for farmland through land reform is something that we can learn from Brazil. But then in Brazil, they also recognize that, look, we need markets for this food. We've grown this food agroecologically. Who's going to buy this stuff from us? And so they work with government to make sure that 30% of local food in schools comes from these farms. So 30% of food in schools is local. And then if farmers are growing it agroecologically, which means that they're not applying pesticides, industrial pesticides and industrial fertilizers, but instead just paying their workers well to go in and farm properly, then they get 30% more money. They get paid above market to do the right thing by their workers and by the soil. How awesome is that? You have a food policy that's fought for by these militant landless people that requires that children in schools eat well, and that if they're eating ecological food, the government will pay them more because we recognize that we have to pay more for food that's grown sustainably. And then they say, all right, well, we've got this amazing system, we're feeding our kids, but the minute our kids get out of school, what do they see? They see adverts for Coke and Pepsi. And so the same alliance is pushing now to end marketing of everything to children. Now, I mean, think how big that is, right? I mean, does anyone here study economics? We have a couple of economists. So what is marketing? In economic terms, what is marketing? How does marketing get explained? It's information, right? For rational consumers need information on which to base their decisions. So if rationally you decide that you would like to buy a burger, the information that you get from Wendy's and from McDonald's and from Burger King is information that you then process and evaluate and make your decision about what rationally you would like to eat. Now, let's set aside that that's bullshit. I mean, the idea of the rational consumer is nonetheless one of these sort of the basic assumptions of modern economics. But even then, we recognize that children are not rational. Right? We don't let children vote. We don't let children drive. Even in Texas, we don't let children have guns. And one of the things that, if we accept that children are not rational, then why are we marketing to them? You have to accept that if children are not rational, they cannot be fodder for marketing. It's just unconscionable that they are the targets of this kind of marketing. And so in Brazil, the idea is, look, we have to build this alternative food system. We also have to destroy the one that stops people learning how to cook and stops, and miseducates people in the modern food system. And turns down so in other words, we have to turn down the noise and the confusion. One of the ways to do that is to restrict the marketing of food to children. I mean, I push for stronger than that, but let's start with the kids, shall we? But that these ideas are in practice, and they do stitch together a range of things. It's about consumption, about production, about gender, about access to resources, about access to finance. All of this put together. But these are good ideas, and it seems to me that in the US, you have land trusts that are cropping up all over the place that offer some kind of way of thinking about land reform. There's the New York State Young Farmer Loan Forgiveness Fund, where if you have gone to a state college and you would and you promise to stay in New York and farm for 5 years, you get your education debt forgiven. So it's a way of encouraging. There are only 15 slots in that program, but it's a step in the right direction. It seems to me that if you're interested in young people becoming farmers, then forgiving their debts through education, which in any case, everything should be tuition free. But the idea of that program is one that's geared towards understanding that actually farming is something that we should be encouraging people to do. So there are these policies that are piecemeal, but could be part of a more comprehensive agrarian transformation in the United States. A lot of people are coming at it from lots of different angles, but Brazil seems to me a place where they seem to have got quite a lot of it right. Is that?
Yeah.
Yes.
So if we're trying to get more people to farm for themselves, cook for themselves, what role do you see things like restaurants that make kind of local organic sustainable food trendy? What role do you see that playing? Or things like, I'm doing BuzzFeed tasty videos that make cooking seem so easy, but it's a lot of kind of like more processed foods. Do do you think that's helping people move towards being more self-stable, or is that kind of hindering?
I don't know. I mean, but part of me feels like BuzzFeed must die. But I also, I mean, I like the idea that there's something, you know, if there's some sort of gateway drug to understanding that food can be good, then I'm all for it. And if that gateway drug is the taste of your first tomato, then that's fine. And if it's in a schmancy restaurant, then that restaurant has converted someone to the cause of actually paying attention to what things might taste like. And in the same way that I mean, these restaurants can be venues for understanding, like, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know things could taste this way. How awesome is that? And then, inspire the idea that I can do this and I can do this at home. That's a good thing. I mean, I'm for that reason, I think that sort of molecular gastronomy is just toss, basically. But I'm much more interested in sort of this idea of California cuisine, of understanding that there are ways of eating sustainably and eating things that are just like, I didn't know that something like this could taste this way. And it's so simple and it tastes so damn good. Why, I'm going to do this at home. Insofar as restaurants can do that, that's great. I'm not sure that clicking on a video gives you that experience. And I do think that one of the problems with the food system is that our consumption of it has become so attenuated that we aren't hedonists in the right way. One of the things I like about the Recipe Day is that it's pleasure, left, right, and center. It's about sensuousness. It's about understanding how things cook and smell and getting your hands in it. And clicking is just this. It's you want to use everything, and you want to. I think the modern food system has discouraged sensuality, and if we're interested in change, then I mean, this is one of the nice things about being involved in food work. If I was involved in climate change work, I don't have the fortitude for it, because every day something shitty happens, and you just need to steel your resolve against the next crappy thing that will happen. Whereas in the food system, it's like you could be a hedonist. You have to be a hedonist to do it well. I mean, when I was growing up as a leftist, if I was enjoying myself, I was doing it wrong. Whereas now, if you're doing it right, you have to be having fun. You have to be experiencing pleasure. That's why things like slow food. Do people know slow food? Many people know it as a sort of circle jerk of olive oil fanciers and red wine fetishists. But in fact, slow food has has some really radical roots. It's an organization that recognizes that in order for, basically everyone deserves pleasure. And the things that people need for pleasure are time and money. And so we must organize to make sure that everyone can afford to eat well, and everyone has the time to do it. And that means unionizing, that means seizing back government from the right. It means engaging in a range of public policy initiatives so that people can enjoy themselves. And so that's not BuzzFeedable really, but it is the sort of thing that you can have in a high-end restaurant, but it's also the sort of thing that basically you should be able to have round the table 3 times a day. And that kind of invitation to sensuousness and pleasure, I think, is a really good political recruiting tool for a radical food movement. So yeah, like I say, BuzzFeed must die, but good food should flourish. So at the back, you had a question?
Yeah. I don't know if someone else asked this before, but previously colonized countries don't always have the same amount of autonomy as like the major Western countries. So when they try to implement self-serving policies like food security, that kind of damages Western markets, and America and the IMF and the World Bank and everywhere else would want to stop them from doing that. So how do you get past the kind of like the corruption on the high level where people, like politicians, are getting paid to not implement these policies, and how do you get over the dependency on Western countries for food?
That's a great question. I mean, Exhibit A for that is Haiti, right? I mean, Haiti in the 1980s was leaning left. And so Presidents Reagan and then Bush 1 and then Clinton in particular imposed structural adjustment policies, these austerity policies that we saw in Malawi, that basically destroyed the economy of Haiti. Haiti was self-sufficient in rice in the late 1970s, and now almost entirely dependent on US imports of rice. And that was done by design because Haiti had the temerity to want its own agriculture policy. Haiti, Haitians responded by electing a left-wing government, and again, the U.S. moved in and basically staged a coup in the mid-2000s, the mid-aughts, to depose a democratically elected government in Haiti for so that the various puppets could be installed, and World Bank economic policy said, yes, Haitian factories Haitian sweatshops are terribly inefficient because they only work 8 hours a day, but if we made them work 24 hours a day, we'd be able to actually increase the GDP of Haiti. And then, of course, you have the earthquake on top of that, and it's a disaster. There's, there are a lot of people in Haiti who have very good ideas about how to transform their food system, and in small ways they are doing that. But a lot of the responsibility in this story lies here. I mean, even Bill Clinton, America's serial apologist, was in front of the Senate a few years ago saying, look, we shouldn't treat food like television sets, which is exactly what he had done, right? We need to remove food from an economy where we think of it as just another commodity. And although the US government doesn't seem to be doing this anytime soon, I think that we need to be, I mean, my solution to this is reparations. I think that actually if we're serious about understanding colonialism, we have to understand how it is historically that we take a relationship to that. And that means reparations not just for the damage that the US has done. So this is not just about, we need to change our aid policy. It's about, we need to atone and pay back for what it is that we've done. Not just overseas, but in the United States. There's reparations for slavery, it's reparations for indigenous genocide. Those aren't easy things to talk about. But it's much better we do talk about them than we say, well, we can't really do anything, can we? I mean, there's going to be corruption. Because the corruption is something that we are party to if we think it normal and insurmountable, normal and normalized. But if we think that actually reparations, which people are still pushing for, Ta-Nehisi Coates' terrific piece in The Atlantic on the case for reparations, is a live document, and he wasn't the first person to say it. The World Conference on Racism that was in 1999 was a live forum for the pushing of reparations. Again, the US government squirmed at that. It's unlikely that this particular administration is going to be receptive to anything like that, but that doesn't mean we can't organize for it, and we must. But that means we need bigger dreams than the ones we have at the moment. The Democratic Party is not really a place for dreams. We need to, our dreams about social change and about responsibility and about power need to start with a relationship to history, exactly as you've invited us to do by observing the freedoms that colonialized, that previously colonized countries still don't have, and we must take that seriously. So I think there is a case for reparations, domestic and international, and that's not a movement that is unthinkable unless you don't think it. So think it. Yes.
I feel like every day we're berated with like new global issues, like Trump, Russia, it's just insurmountable. And so I feel like food justice and issues having to do with food are often pushed by the wayside. Like how, at least even in a small community like our college campus, how can we legitimize food justice as a major issue that we should be addressing?
Well, I mean, so is the question that the university administration is not taking it seriously, or I mean, to whom does it need to be legitimized?
I feel most of the American public and definitely the American administration, but that seems like a really big thing to challenge. But I mean, I know that there are definitely simple ways that we here at the college can steps that we can take towards legitimizing food justice. Well,
I mean, I think a tremendous place to start is to observe that 50 million Americans, more or less, are food insecure, and how fucked up is that, right? I mean, just to observe that here we are in glorious California, right by some of the best agricultural land, and still we have depths of poverty here and depths of hunger that are utterly unconscionable. And to be able to be standing up for the capacity for people to be able to fight to end that hunger seems to me not to require no legitimization at all. It seems to me just an exercise that is noble in and of itself. But again, that's only as noble as we allow it to be. I only go on a quick digression here because there are some ways that you could do this that would be wrong. So, in the fight against global malnutrition, the British Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, once said that global malnutrition is a huge problem because in countries where malnutrition is prevalent, they lose up to 5% of GDP. Because children are malnourished and they never end up being productive individuals in society. 5% of GDP, and if you write that across the world, that's trillions of dollars that is just trillions of dollars, and we can solve this for a mere 100 million. That's good investment, ladies and gentlemen, is what he said. Now, he was saying that in the context of international development aid, and that's the sort of thing that people are okay with in those circles, because today we've come to think of international change as a pure economics exercise where you have a scarcity frontier and you just have to make hard choices about where it is you're going to spend your money. As opposed to, if someone had said that 30 years ago, they would have been hounded as morally bankrupt. To be able to say, look, the reason to solve child hunger is because kids, it's good investment. Whereas now, one of the big funds in the United States, in the United Kingdom, is called the Children's Investment Fund, CIF. They have billions of dollars under management. The whole point of the Children's Investment Fund is to invest in children. That's their vision. That shows you how far we've come in going down a road where the only reason we do something is because it provides a return on investment, but that's the only legitimate way of doing things. To be able to draw a line in the sand and say, no, actually, the reason to end hunger is because it's wrong that anyone goes hungry, is to really fight against the tide of our times. And you should feel good and strong about standing up and saying, yes, there's Russia, yes, there's Trump, but you know what? We have hunger in this country and we have hunger around the world, and here's how we end it, and here's how it's related to education policy, here's how it's related to healthcare policy, here's how it's related to land policy. And you can make those links, but you can't do it alone. That's what social movements are for. That's why Noam Chomsky likes the MST, because everyone does it together. You have a movement of 1 million families doing it together. And I think that's also one of the sort of rallying cries of now, is we need to build a movement that's not just about, wouldn't it be nice to raise SNAP and WIC entitlements, or wouldn't it be nice to just sort of nudge at the minimum wage, but actually to dream for something much bigger. But again, the only people who can give us permission to do that is us. Yes, sir. Oh, so ma'am, we are. Sorry.
Thank you. I was wondering, you just mentioned history in a couple of different ways, and I was wondering, firstly, in this case of Malawi, firstly, I didn't get who you were saying the scientists, the social and natural scientists who were doing this experience. I mean, it was the people themselves, right, growing, but how did they start organizing, like, what do they call themselves? Do they call themselves anything? But,
yes.
So that was like an identification, but you'll tell us a bit more about that, I suppose. But historically, though, I wonder, so we talked about like where they were when this, in 2000, right? So the malnutrition, and then like as, the diversification of the crops, etc. But like then you say women, the problem was that women were taking responsibility then for this extra work as well as their past responsibilities. But I don't know, and then, so this is how they went about remedying it, or trying to remedy it. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that, you mentioned at all, like, did they look at history in the sense of how they did get to this point, or what was the systems before you had it, where women were trying to control the harvest, or needed to control the harvest in order to control the source of income? Like, was it considered at all, well, we need to think about further back, or history, at what point did perhaps this style of, what did lead it to be that place at all? I don't know.
No, that's a great question. So the group is called the Soils, Food and Healthy Communities Initiative. And if you if you Google soilandfood.org, or you can Google, you type that into the address bar. Soilandfood.org is the website, and they were doing this. I mean, it emerged really as part of a graduate student who was also a church member getting together with the nurse from the neonatal rehabilitation unit. It was just pretty straightforward. And they were addressing this very practical issue of, look, we understand why people are going hungry, how are we going to get crop diversification, and then how are we going to make sure that, that kids are actually getting to eat well and that they are breastfed. And so it centers really in this instance around good maternal and sort of postpartum care and then neonatal care from the hospital. So the question of colonialism hasn't, as far as I'm aware, come up. It's not something that has been engaged with in this way. What has come up is patriarchy and how to end it. So the question of how patriarchy started and the sort of British colonial administration that encouraged and built on systems of patriarchy that were already there, that's not something that's come up. But in terms of, all right, here we are now, what do we do about it? That's come up quite a lot. And that involves repurposing of history in an interesting way. Or fiction, depending on which way you look at it. I mean, if you look at one of the lines that she used was about Adam and Eve. Now, Adam and Eve is not traditionally the kind of story that's about gender equality, right? When it's taught Old Testament style, that's not an equality story. But what she's doing there is using that language and that sort of that shared historical memory of how it is that we think we thought about Adam and Eve, and redoing it. And that remixing of the Bible, but remixing it in a way where gender equality is front and center, is, it seems to me, very creative revisionist history, and a very creative kind of activism, where the stories that matter to people are not stories about, well, the British came over here and they got us all involved in tobacco and sugar production. It's much more about, look, everyone there has names like Winston and Jennifer and Sarah. Why? Because they're all Scottish Presbyterians in northern Malawi. The town where they live is near where they live is called Livingstonia, where Livingstone, the British explorer, came with his Scottish ideas, Scottish Christian ideas. And so people live that history in a particular way. So for me, what's important is ideas of understanding Marx and colonial history, and for what matters in northern Malawi is understanding how, what white Jesus does, and understanding how it is that you can take that and flip it in a way that then makes makes gender equality possible.
Okay, but a lot of people.
I think that that's as good an answer as I'm able to give right now. I'm starting to fade a little bit, I'm sorry. It's a way of saying that you can do this as an entirely practical exercise, but using practical history, the history that matters to people. And in this case, what matters is the Bible.
Can I just clarify that though? So when you talk about how they should be patriarchy here, and that's what they understand and want to remedy using whatever. And you also need to focus a lot. You see that, for example, the example of the Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, right? And like the shift that was happening for women in this time, that they were being given this new role. Do I understand that as you saying that really patriarchy, a significant thing for patriarchy, either mostly emerged then, or like that there was a new type of patriarchy that is when I seem to understand that patriarchy has been around for a while and in several places. Although I don't know. I've heard things that make me think patriarchy is really very much a very Western thing, but I don't know.
Again, this is not to imagine a sort of pre-patriarchal, romanticized African pastoral. Patriarchy was around, but the contours of it are the ones that look very much like Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. So in feudal England, was there patriarchy? There was, but were there also spaces in which women were healers and educators and spiritual leaders? There were. were there ways in which women could participate in the public sphere and govern the commons as peers? There were, and all of those were crushed. And so the particular contours in which patriarchy operates under capitalism are very unique. So although many societies have patriarchy,